Favor? That is unanimous with everyone here. We are back in public session. Thank you. July 25th regular Board of Education meeting will be canceled. There will be a special Board of Education meeting on Tuesday, August 8th at 7:30 p.m. in the Central Office Board meeting room. Thank you. With that, Michelle, we will move over to public comment.
Good afternoon. If anyone would like to participate in public comment, please use the raised hand icon. We'll start online.
Anyone?
There are
online?
no raised hands. Anyone in person would like to participate?
Thank you. With that, we will move over to legal updates. And with that, we have Attorney Jessica Richmond Smith with us. Welcome, Jessica. Thank you for being here today during our retreat and from Shipman Goodwin and providing some legal updates to us. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to Jess as well. Just done a great job for us throughout the year, and it's nice for you to be here. Thank you for taking the time for putting stuff together, Jess.
Well, again, thanks for having me. I think this is probably one of the earliest legislative updates that we're giving, which is why you have my own personal version that I put together just for you. Shipman and Goodwin, as you probably know, puts together our official legal update, which comes out a little bit later in the summer. So this is what I'm calling the unofficial update, which includes the highlights. It doesn't include everything. When our official update comes out, you'll see that there's a little more, but this is what I thought was most relevant for you today. It also just, in particular, and Shirley, I'm looking at you, it doesn't really include all of the special education updates, which I'm sure you'll hear from Andy and others, and those are a little bit more technical. I will mention a couple of things that affect special education, but for the most part, these are the highlights. So I've organized this into different categories of changes. And once again, this year, the legislature was extremely busy. And what I did is I put in red text the dates that these different laws become effective to help you understand what your obligations are and when. And I will try to point out where certain provisions take effect this year. So I'm going to start off by talking about changes affecting school district operation. And for starters, the Connecticut State Department of Education is stealing my job because they are going to develop a board member training, which is going to be required of newly elected board members as of this year. Their training is going to include, at a minimum, the roles and responsibilities of a board member, the duties and obligations of a board of ed, and school district budgeting and education finance. So great to have. I'll be interested to see what they put together, but anybody who's newly elected as of this year will need to take that training.
Jessica, just on certain things, maybe we'll ask as we go along here, if that's all right with you.
Of course. Yeah.
Does that does not, that we could still do some of our own onboarding and training with you or Tom, and then this is another piece to it, so to speak.
That's correct. Right.
Okay,
and
thank you.
I was being a little snarky, but I don't know what they're going to train you on. But, so yes, I think it would be a good idea to supplement.
Great.
Yes. For those being reelected, does this?
Good question.
That is a good question.
First time.
I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to dig a little deeper into the legislation and the history. My guess is no, because the legislation talks about newly elected,
Okay.
but I can let you know.
It says first time there, so I'm assuming it's not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there an expectation that these will be administered locally, or is CABE expected to administer this?
I
CDS.
think that I think that this would be administered locally, but I don't know. And it's, again, TBD is they have to complete the training at a time and in a manner determined by the state, but no later than 1 year after assuming office. So a lot of this you'll see, as with a lot of legislative changes, is to be determined because it's in the hands of the State Department of Education to come up with a plan.
Okay.
So I may be saying a lot of we don't know yet.
Okay.
In this meeting.
So it's even more important that we continue to do what we're doing because this has it, but no later than 1 year after assuming office. So
Right.
we'll continue with what we're doing and then get your guidance as this plays out.
I think that makes sense. And there are, I think, multiple types of trainings where there's a required training, but then there's supplements that boards or administrators do.
Good, thank you.
The second requirement is, as you probably know, superintendents have to submit school district receipts, expenditures, and statistics to the Commissioner of Education on an annual basis. And so the change here is that the State Department of Education is now required to publish that information on its website by February of 2024, so this school year. And then beginning in the following school year, the state has to develop and publish data in a way that allows for comparisons between and among districts along those different data points, specifically student enrollment and demographic statistics and other financial information.
Thank you, Dave.
Sorry, Duke, I had my hand up a little late on the first point. What happens if you don't do the state training to a board member? What's the penalty?
I don't know that there is a penalty.
Thanks. So Jessica, just on this, it's a strange word in that financial comparison, including enrollment, demographics. To me, district receipts and expenditures, like what, that seems somewhat specific, receipts. I mean, is this more publishing Rich's, financial statements? And then my second part of that question would be, is the state driving districts to be on some similar type system in order for them to enable them to do a comparison from district to district? And not sure what that comparison would show, because every district is so different in a way. Might be some similarities in a county by county, but
Yeah, no, those are good questions. Anticipating your first question, I looked at the statute to see, well, what do they mean by receipts, expenditures, and statistics? And the statute doesn't say. So I would look to, not to put you on the spot, Rich, but I mean, it's something that you've been doing. So whatever
Yeah.
data is already submitted needs to continue to be submitted. As for your second question, I don't know that they necessarily have an agenda as to getting everybody to be aligned in the way that they submit data, but if that's another question where my answer is, we'll see.
sure.
It's incumbent upon the State Department of Education to publish the data in a way that allows for financial comparisons, but the legislation says that the state must develop and publish the data in that way. Will they put that back on school districts? Probably, but that remains to be seen.
I would have to say we almost have a standard the state could use in terms of Rich's monthly and annual financial reporting.
My guess is that to the extent that they can help streamline this process for themselves, they probably will.
Yeah, good, thank you.
And I don't know, Rich, if you want to provide details.
Yeah,
So every year we have to submit what's called an EFS report.
Right.
First, so that's when all the states submit all their financial expenditures and data. I personally don't think it provides any value to anybody because the way they collapse all the information. So they don't care whether you have an RC 1 or 10 or doesn't matter. Everything kind of gets lumped into a couple broad categories. And then what they try to do is look at like academic together. They look at support operations together. So really all it is a way to probably compare the EFS report. But it's probably not going to provide much information.
there's no focus on what was the annual appropriation? Did you go over that? Did you return money back to the?
So every
village?
year we do have to submit an MBR report.
Okay,
So that is, what was your budget? How much did you spend? And then what was your following year's budget?
good, thank you.
Um,
Yes, Jill.
Is it organized at the level of the line items that are required by statute? Is that the level of which you're looking at, or is that?
Nope. Yeah, it doesn't match that at all.
The next change is puzzling to me because it basically requires to do what you're already required to do under FOIA. So 10-220 is the statute that sets forth your responsibilities and obligations to the Board of Education. So the legislature has added to that your obligation to post your board meeting agenda and any associated documents, which you have to do anyway under FOIA. What's interesting is I think most districts, including you all, post your associated documents in advance. FOIA actually doesn't require you to do that. You just have to post your agenda. But now you are required to do that under this change to 10-220.
And it doesn't specify a time frame, whereas we post within a certain period of time before a meeting.
It doesn't, but this does not supersede your obligations under FOIA.
Right.
So whatever FOIA requires, you have to continue doing. Again, the one kind of nuance is that FOIA doesn't require that you post in advance your board packet. It just requires that you post your agenda. And so there isn't an associated timeline with posting the board packet.
Dave, did you have a quick question? Great, thanks. Good.
SROs. So as you probably know, you are required to have a memorandum of understanding with your police department related to SROs in your schools. Starting now, any MOUs that are entered into, extended, updated, or amended on or after July 21st, 2023, have to include certain changes. And specifically, they have to address SRO's duties concerning and procedures for the restraint of students, the use of firearms, school-based arrests, and reporting of any investigations and behavioral interventions. Just as a procedural matter, the MOU has to be maintained in a central location in the school district and posted on the district's website and the website of each school in which the SROs are assigned. So we're right now working on updates to our model SRO MOU. So if you're going to be updating, extending, et cetera, your MOU, you'll need to include those changes now.
So this probably came out of the children who went to the legislator and didn't want to have SROs. So therefore they wanted a sort of more guidelines and so on. We do have MOUs and most of them touch on those areas. We'll have to do a cross-reference, but basically we do have those.
So
Yeah.
does that mean that we'd be undergoing a process right now to review our current MOUs, make sure they're up to snuff, and then it looks like they have to be posted?
Yeah, as of receiving this, yeah, we're gonna have to sort of like this cross-reference what it looks like. Are we specific about, I don't know, the
It's an
investigation?
entered into, so we have entered into one. I guess my question would be, how often do we review this? Is this something we should do on an annual basis with the police department?
It is a couple of, I think it runs for 2 years, maybe, but it's multi-year that we have and we review it and re-enter into that.
So Jessica, is
MOU.
that up to us, whether it's a 1 year, 2 year, or 3 year
It
MOU?
is. Yeah,
Okay.
your MOU, what I would recommend doing is looking at your MOU, seeing when it expires and making sure that you conform with these requirements when you update it.
Pending what work you're doing to give us guidance on that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
I mean, pull it out now, whether you want to amend it now, even if it expires later to include these, we can talk about.
Okay. Good.
Maybe not in public session.
Yes.
It's funny, it doesn't talk about SSOs.
Right. No, this is just SROs, and SSOs have their own specific statutory scheme.
We also have an MOU for that, but that's okay.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jill.
Does the posting requirement follow the amendment?
That's a good question. I think that I would read this to mean that you have to now maintain whatever MOU you have in a central location and post it. I can check on that one particular, but
Good. Ours is not posted, right?
No.
As of now?
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah.
so the next change is a big one. This relates to indoor air quality. And the highlight here is that beginning January 1st, 2024, boards of education will have to provide for a uniform indoor air quality inspection and evaluation in each school building on an annual basis and using the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency's Indoor Air Quality Tools for Schools program. So that's a change because the current statute on this 10-220 now requires you to conduct indoor air quality inspections every 3 years for any school building that was constructed, extended, renovated, or replaced on or after January 1st, 2023. Now, beginning January 1st, 2024, you're going to have to do that annually using specifically the Tools for Schools program. So that is, that's a big change. And we have an environmental group that's all over this. So if you want help analyzing this and ensuring you're in compliance, let us know. There are also some changes related to HVAC inspections. So under current law, boards of ed have to conduct HVAC inspections and evaluations by a certified technician, certified industrial hygienist, or mechanical engineer within each of their school buildings every 5 years and in accordance with statutory standards. So the act extends, the new legislation extends the deadline for completing that inspection and evaluation to January 1st, 2025, and also establishes a certain waiver process of that deadline in certain circumstances. If the Department of Administrative Services finds that there is an insufficient number of certified individuals or engineers to perform the inspection and evaluation, or if the board has scheduled the inspection and evaluation for a date after January 1st, 2025. Those are the highlights. I don't know that you want to hear me read everything in here. But
No, thank you.
the big headline is the annual IAQ review.
Good, Dave.
Not a legal question, but is the state going to be paying for this? Is this essentially an unfunded mandate?
The latter.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Good. I don't necessarily want to get into the weeds on some of this stuff, and we can always do follow-up at additional board meetings, but just at a high level, Rich, we're good with this. You and Kevin understand all this, and it's just part of building it into your routine.
Yeah, I mean, so we've been doing the certifying there. Cost of it, so you'll see that.
Okay, you'll see that cost escalating. Okay, we'll thank the state for that.
This is one that isn't really a highlight. I just thought it was interesting because I hear a lot about temperature in schools, especially during exams in the spring.
Or Board of Ed meeting or.
Or that. Although interesting, I don't know if this applies to Board of Ed meetings or just
No.
schools in session. So by July 1st, 2024, the Commissioner of Public Health has to establish guidelines for the optimal temperature range for school facilities. That's very wishy-washy. There's no requirements yet. It's just guidelines have to be established.
Wow.
And which is just by implication, there are currently no guidelines for optimal temperature ranges in schools, which I think leads to a lot of concern among various stakeholders. So those are the headlines for changes affecting school district operation. I'm now going to move into changes affecting students. So I'm sure you have all heard that the legislature has decided to raise the kindergarten age starting July 1st, 2024. I kind of smiled when I heard this because my twins were born in November and I held them and I thought, well, I guess I was prescient. But the headline here is that you have to have reached 5 on or before September 1st, starting with July 1st, 2024 in order to enter kindergarten. There's a process whereby there can be exceptions made, but that's the general rule. Interestingly, there was some guidance that was issued recently about what this is going to mean. And it's estimated that over 9,000 kids that previously would have been entering kindergarten next year will not be able to enter kindergarten. And as a result, there may be a shortage in preschool slots. So this will have a ripple effect, which may or may not impact you. The other thing that is probably obvious is that your cohort will be a lot smaller. Your cohort of kids who enter kindergarten starting next year will be a lot smaller. This is also something that isn't really, I see.
Yes.
Sorry,
Sorry,
can you guys
Sarah.
hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes. There-
Okay,
yes,
sorry,
Sarah, go ahead.
okay, it's very loud here. I'm sorry, I'm in the atrium of the hospital. Just curious if Rich, if you have any sense of what that means for how much this will affect us and what that means for the class or the grade sizes for the next year and the year following.
I don't know if it'll necessarily be for next year. I mean, we are seeing elementary enrollment currently less than expected. Part of that is at Royal, where we were expecting more kids from the new developments that haven't materialized. But it is likely, as Jessica mentioned, that in future cohorts will be smaller, which means you'll have smaller elementary classes. And then as they go through the middle school, you'll probably see that population decline as well as they kind of flow through the system.
Yeah, I think it's 2024, correct? Right?
2024,
Yeah.
so next school year. Yeah.
Great. Dave?
Sorry, Rich. Why would this be an ongoing? Like I could see a 1-year blip, but it wouldn't be.
Right, it's just as they kind of matriculate through the system.
Okay,
That's when you'll see it.
right. So the first year of the change.
That
they said
smaller
we'll see
group
it.
will stay small throughout the district.
Correct.
Yeah.
But then over time, we'll go back to averages.
Julie?
I was gonna ask the same thing.
John?
What, if you look at typical kindergarten classes, how many fall into that, percentage wise, fall into that September to December range?
That we would have to pull the data for. That I don't
Yeah,
know offhand.
because I mean, as mentioned earlier, as you get later in the year, you typically have parents hold back. So it sounds like that 9,000 was statewide number.
Yes.
Good. Jill?
I'm expecting this to impact our ELP program. So I just, at a date in the short future, would love to understand what capacity we have and what programmatic changes we're making, because it would mean changes. Will now have an older cohort of students. So anyway, no surprise.
We built capacity in our new ELP wing.
I hope so.
Thanks. Thanks, Jessica.
The next change has to do with age, the age for special education eligibility. So this was a federal court ruling last year that said that special education must be provided until an eligible student, the earlier of when an eligible student graduates from high school or when they turn the school year when the student reaches age 22. So that is now codified in state law. So again, the earlier of when the student who is eligible for special education services graduates from high school, or the end of the school year when they turn 22, not their birthday.
So if their birthday's in August or July,
Yeah.
then they're good through that following year?
Yes,
Okay, got it. Jill?
May I just add one thing to that, Jessica?
please.
So currently, with the legislative change 21 to 22, it was the day before they turned 22. So if we have a student who's turning 22 on October 10th, they only could stay in school till October 9th. The new law says they can stay for the continuation of that year.
Okay.
So they can stay till June, when that end of the year, the end of the school year. So that's a significant difference. So
Thank
they
you.
qualify.
Yeah, no, that's good. So the court case didn't make that didn't extend their eligibility to remain.
Right.
Yeah.
You have a follow-up, Jill?
I do, thank you. So similar capacity question. I know it's a very small cohort, but it's also a small space that cohort uses. So just would love for us to understand whether or not we have enough flexibility with the staffing and the space we have.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Next big change is bullying has been completely overhauled again. So in 2019, the legislature made significant changes to the bullying statute, which took effect in 2021. What was interesting to me about that is they took effect in the middle of COVID, and many of the school districts around the state, I think, just weren't even really aware that there was such a significant change that needed to be implemented. There was a very significant change, and just to do a little history lesson here. So the big change that took effect in 2021 is that a single incident could be considered bullying if it placed an individual in reasonable fear of physical or emotional harm, if it caused physical or emotional harm to an individual, or if it disrupted an individual's education at school. I'm saying individual because the law previously changed references to students, to individuals, which created all sorts of confusion. In any event, there was a significant change in 2021, and now there's really, I'm going to call it a sea change. They've turned this statute on its head. They've changed definitions. They've changed roles and responsibilities. There's now, CAVE is actually responsible for developing a new school climate policy, which you'll in turn be responsible for adopting. And they've also redefined bullying and created a new term called challenging student behavior. So those are just a couple of the highlights around the changes to the bullying law, but needless to say, you'll need to update and revise your bullying policy, your safe school climate plan, the personnel who are assigned to fill the different roles. Bullying will be defined, and by the way, in terms of when this takes effect, it must take effect. You have to adopt and implement the new bullying policy by the 25-26 school year, but you're permitted to do that earlier, either this school year or next school year. So if you're itching to make that change right now, go for it. But otherwise, my guess is that people are going to need to take their time to do this, because at a minimum, you're going to have to wait for CAVE to develop the policy. So I'm not sure, who knows when that's going to happen. The new definition of bullying is, I mentioned before what the current definition is, but the new definition will be unwanted and aggressive behavior among children in grades K through 12 inclusive that involves a real or perceived power imbalance. So that is completely different than what we have now. And of course, just as a reminder, you do have to comply with the current law. So I'm doing trainings now for administrators on the current law. And that's going to be confusing too, because people, I think, are still getting up to speed about what happened in 2021, and then they're going to have to shift again.
Jill. Oh, sorry, Jessica, I cut you
No.
off.
I have two questions. One is like just Amy or Alan, I don't know if either of you or Jessica can provide any context of why we think this change was put into place. What are they trying to solve for? And the second question is, this is grades kindergarten through 12, but our school district is actually pre-K through 22. So I was just curious to understand that.
I think at one level, they're trying to make the definition more encompassing because it could prove difficult we didn't think it was finite, but some people do. Your legislators think it's more finite. Beyond that, I can't really speak much more to it.
Yeah, so I can just answer that from a practical perspective and what I've noticed. What I've noticed is that almost everything that happens between kids that's nasty behavior has to be legal bullying under the 2021 definition. And it's really challenging. There's actually no intent in the current definition. It's just if you do something, and obviously if it's an accident, but if you do something, if a kid who's in second grade, knocks into somebody because they don't like what they're doing, and the other kid is afraid, right? It's been really challenging to not call that bullying. And so I've worked with districts around, well, we have to say that this meets the definition of bullying under state law. However, let's look at this from a more practical, reasonable perspective, given that these are young kids. So my guess is that these changes were really an effort to make bullying have a more egregious, higher standard. Okay. Because now it's unwanted and aggressive behavior. Before it was just, does the behavior cause physical or emotional harm, or place a person in a reasonable fear of physical or emotional harm. There's also a new term in the law called challenging behavior, which is defined as behavior that negatively impacts school climate or interferes or is at risk of interfering with the learning or safety of a student or the safety of a school employee. So now we have employees in there. And that was always a question under the 2021 definition when they changed student to individual. As you can see, I can go on and on all day about this, but.
Interesting, you're going to have to define like Title IX stuff aside,
Yeah.
unwanted.
Right.
Right. I mean, now we've got another definition to
We have
define.
unwanted, and I think challenging behavior they put in there because they were trying to distinguish between really aggressive behavior and Alan, to your point, unwanted and aggressive behavior and behavior that just creates a hostile environment that we need to deal with in another way.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, two questions, just following up. So I see the term in here, perceived power imbalance. What are the contours of that phrase? Okay.
I mean, I say that because I think we need to wait for CAVE to develop its school climate policy and to get more guidance on this.
Dave, I would ask your legislatures what they meant by that.
I mean, yeah, no, I mean, to be honest, I mean, I ask some of these questions sometime because I think the public needs to know this isn't us always.
Right.
Sometimes it
No,
comes from the
good point.
state, and if you don't like it, like,
Very good point.
you can complain to us, but we're stuck.
Yeah.
There's a little PSA built in. But the other question I would have is, you mentioned intent, so I guess the question is, when you look at bullying, is there any sort of intent or mens rea or anything along those lines that's required, or is it just in the perception of the target? Like, does the person have to actually intend to do a bullying act, or is it basically an act happens and that's perceived as bullying, so now we're in?
Right, so I would say the word unwanted suggests to me that you have to establish that the target, the victim, didn't ask for it, right? And so I guess your question is, well, did the perpetrator intend to hurt?
Is there culpable
Right.
mental state attendant to the act?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I don't want to answer that yet, because I think we need to see how this plays out. I want to look at the language that's forthcoming from Cade.
Hmm.
And I think that the new definition is similar to the current definition in that there's a lot of focus on the impact on the victim, as opposed to the intent of the perpetrator. That's currently the case, and I don't really see a real change.
Right, but I would think that that would have to come at the legislative level versus the policy guidance. So if it's not built in now that you actually have to have intent, then.
That's true.
Right.
No, you're right. The policy guidance can't change that. In terms of how we determine what is unwanted and aggressive behavior, that's where I think we might get some guidance.
So I really read this as coming from the perception of the target versus the perpetrator, if you will.
I think that's right, especially when you talk
As
about a
drafted.
perceived
Right.
power imbalance, whose perception.
Okay.
And those are all really good questions. We'll just have to see how this plays out. And we have a lot of work to do to figure out how we're going to train administrators on how to implement this. Speaking of which, there's also a new required annual training as part of this new law. Sorry, March. So beginning next school year, you have to provide resources and annual training to school employees. And I actually don't really know who is included in this. I think it's probably everybody, teachers and administrators, a certified staff, about social and emotional learning, school climate and culture, and evidence and research-based interventions, including but not limited to restorative practices. We saw a lot in the way of adding restorative practices last year in the legislative changes, and that's continuing to be a theme this year.
Thank you, Jessica.
Suicide risks and interventions. So as you're probably aware, you're currently required to have a written policy and procedures for dealing with youth suicide prevention and attempts. So far, there really has not been a lot of guidance from the state about what you should include there. And so the update here is that there is more guidance for you around what to include here. So the act requires that the risk factors for youth suicide requires that the risk factors be based on the statewide strategic suicide prevention plan developed by the Connecticut Suicide Advisory Board and include at a minimum youth who are bereaved by suicide, disabled or have chronic health conditions, involved in the juvenile justice system, experiencing homelessness or placed in an out-of-home setting such as foster care, or are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or questioning. So that's the requirement. You also may use an assessment from a list of assessments recommended by the State Department of Education by January 1st, 2024 for determining suicide risk. And that assessment shall be used to determine the suicide risk of students who exhibit mental health distress, have been identified as at a risk of suicide, or are considered to be at an increased risk of suicide based on the risk factors that I just said before. So more guidance around this policy. And I know that for some of the districts I work with, it's been a challenge to figure out what to include in that policy. I mentioned that restorative practices was a theme last year, and it continues to be a theme this year. So starting with the school year, July 1st, 2025, the 25-26 school year, boards have to adopt a new policy, a restorative practices response policy, to be implemented by school employees for incidents of challenging behavior So this is the definition I mentioned before. What is challenging behavior? If you go back to the bullying summary, it's defined there. Or there's an or missing there. I'm sorry about that. Or student conflict that is nonviolent and doesn't constitute a crime. So the act goes on to say that that policy cannot include the involvement of an SRO or other law enforcement unless it becomes violent or criminal. So again, you have to have a policy that spells out use of restorative practices for nonviolent behavior by students, challenging behavior. So those are the highlights of the changes affecting students, excluding special education changes. Moving on to teaching and curriculum. Access to curriculum. So this new law basically codifies in state law what you're already required to do under federal law. So there's a federal law called the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, which is the law that requires you to give parents and guardians the right to inspect all instructional materials, except tests and assessments used by the school district. This state law now basically says the same thing, a little differently though. So it requires each Board of Ed to make available all curriculum approved by the curriculum committee, the school district curriculum committee, and all associated curriculum materials in accordance with that federal law. Where I've seen us get into the weeds of that is what is curriculum, what materials are you required to provide. This law makes it clear that your school district curriculum committee develops curriculum, right? And whatever curriculum they develop has to be made available to the public.
Is there a time frame on that? We're in the process of migrating a bunch of our curriculum to easy online platform.
Yeah, I believe this takes effect now, and I don't think that there is a future date when this has to take effect. So my read is that you have to make it available now. Now, obviously, if you haven't developed anything new, as it becomes developed, it should be made available. Anything that you have should already be available because of this federal law.
What does made available mean? So we are intending to post on a website so that it's easy to access and to find. But I know, for example, under FOIA, made available would mean if I asked for it, you have to provide it.
So I know, it's a good question. I know under the PPRA, made available means if somebody asks for it. I don't believe that there is a posting requirement, but that's another good question that I would need to dig deeper into.
Thank you.
But if you're posting anyway, then that should take care of it. I think that's actually the trend now. A lot of districts are posting the curriculum that's developed by their school district curriculum committee. So beginning with the 25-26 school year, this is now I'm on the next one, required program of instruction. There is a new law that adds civics and media literacy to the required social studies program of instruction. Civics is defined as the study of the rights and obligations of citizens, and media literacy is defined as the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and participate with media in all forms by understanding the role of media in society, etc. So you have a couple of years for that, and you're required to offer it. You are probably all aware that the state is developing by January 1st, 2024, a model curriculum for K-8. So this new law adds to the content of the model curriculum cursive writing and world languages beginning in kindergarten. You may but aren't required to use the state's model curriculum. I was surprised to see that cursive writing is still a thing, but apparently it is. Reading programs. So this was a hot topic last year. It continues to be a hot topic. And basically, so last year, the state said that school districts had to adopt or implement one of 5 recommended reading curriculum models or programs for pre-K to 3rd grade. The change is that now the state has to approve those models or programs, and it's kindergarten rather than pre-K through 3rd grade. So there are, I believe, 5 or 6 kind of approved reading programs that boards of ed can choose from. You can seek a waiver from the requirement to use one of those 5 or 6 required programs. But the waiver, you have to, in order to be granted the waiver, use a program that is evidence-based and scientifically based and focused on competency in the following areas of reading: oral language, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, rapid automatic name or letter name fluency, and reading comprehension. So it's not really a free-for-all. You have to comply with those requirements. The timelines for that are, if you're using one of those approved programs, you have to start implementing partial implementation this year and next year, and you have to fully implement that program beginning with the 25-26 school year. Boards that have gotten a waiver have to begin implementing the alternative curriculum by the 24-25 school year.
Sarah.
Duke, thank you.
Sarah.
Just question for Dr. Fedigan or Alan, do we have any quick update on where that waiver that we filed stands?
No, it's still sitting with the state Department of Education, who hired people to evaluate all of these, and everybody's still waiting.
And if I can just add, Julie Droller and I have a phone call with somebody from the state later on this week, and we expect to get a little bit more clarification on the process and where we are and timeline.
Okay.
That will help
Thank you.
us with our next steps.
Thank you.
Play-based learning. So starting with next school year, boards of ed are offering pre-K programs, and as well as for students attending kindergarten, are required to provide play-based learning during the instructional time of each regular school day. Play-based learning is defined in the law as a pedagogical approach that emphasizes play in promoting learning and includes developmentally appropriate strategies that can be integrated with existing learning standards. The term does not mean time spent in recess or as part of a phys ed course or instruction. So you have to include play-based learning for pre-K and K. You may, but are not required to, although play-based learning in grades 1 through 5, but the law says that boards must allow a teacher to use play-based learning during instructional time for students in grades 1 to 5. So my question for myself is, well, what does that mean? My best reading right now is it means that you're not required to include play-based learning for grades 1 to 5, but if a teacher incorporates it, then you have to allow that teacher to do so. Stay tuned if there are any changes on that interpretation, but that's my current read.
That's kind of like on top of everything else that goes on during a school day. They're just adding to the school day, so to speak.
Well, I think it's a approach to learning rather than something that is, that they have to add. It's a way of learning.
Yeah. But would you say, and maybe Dr. Fedigan, that would have to be consistent across the district? No, you're not going to allow one teacher in 1 3rd grade in one elementary school to do it versus not everyone else, right? I mean, it's kind of a equity thing across the whole district, no?
For sure. And I think there's a wonderful opportunity with the ELP being consolidated in one place in Oxbridge. Just last week, I participated. I'm actually the program director for the PK3 leadership cohort for the UConn's NEAG School of Education. So this is a topic I'm very passionate about. Play-based learning should not be an additional curricula. It shouldn't be something extra that teachers are doing. But to your point about that, that will require some professional learning. It will require a look at the curriculum and then how the curricula is implemented through certain instructional strategies.
Okay.
There are wonderful opportunities, even though, to assess what children are doing through play, and they don't realize they're being assessed. So it's something that I really look forward to exploring more with Julie and Dr. Adley.
Okay, good. Thank you. Julie.
Thank you. This might sound like a joke, but I don't mean it as a joke. Do they ever remove requirements? There are a tremendous number of things
Say
being
that again.
added. Do they ever remove requirements?
Remove requirements.
We're just adding and adding, and I'm out of curiosity. I mean, there's obviously you reach a point where you can't add more. So
It's a good question. A couple of years ago, I don't know whether it was CABE or
Caps.
CAPS asked us to put together a list of all the mandates.
Yeah.
And it was pages and pages
Right.
long to that point. I think they think they're removing requirements sometimes, but in fact, they just add more.
Okay.
And the list does seem to grow and grow.
Well, and I think the continued conversation around that, Julie, is the mandates and the unfunded mandates, and the mandates that
Right.
add costs to the overall district where there's no reimbursement, so to speak,
And-
from the state or no
Sorry.
state funding.
And or where does it squeeze us so that we can't offer things that we want to offer and that we
Right.
know our students are interested in? And yet
Good
we're
point.
at max capacity with so many requirements that it's not possible to.
Right, right. Jill?
So while I share my colleague's concern with the mountain of requirements that keeps growing, I do love play-based learning. So I would love to hear what impacts, we have some, I think it's pretty endemic already in ELP, but if you guys could just speak to what's already in the district and what we expect beyond professional development to be the next steps, to the extent that we're prepared today.
I'll take it first and then turn it over to Amy. If you remember, a couple of years ago, we spoke about Connecticut Dots when we implemented that, which is really a way of assessing students during play and the different attributes of learning, both cognitively, linguistically, socially. So we have that in place. Laura's very excited about the notion of play-based learning. So that is the design we're using in our ELP programs. And again, I don't want to speak to the kindergarten level, but I know there's a nexus between ELP and kindergarten in promoting those activities. But again, Connecticut Dots is going to be very helpful to implementing that.
So Shirley and Amy, I would have to assume that our decision would, it wasn't necessarily an easy decision the way we look at our elementary schools, but this all plays into us consolidating ELP into one building. This enables a more kind of effective, scalability to it. Okay.
Also, I think in the design, but not just the legal aspect of it, but I think the intentional piece to it is that children transition from ELP to kindergarten. They go from a play-based environment and looking at cognition and learning, and then go into sitting in seats and taking on a different role. And we kind of, without intention, eliminated a lot of that opportunity for really play-based learning. So I think it will promote a lot of our values of instruction too.
Thank you.
And I'll just add one more piece. I know that Laura Straighten was a participant several years ago of the program I was just referencing at UConn. So I've touched base with her on that at the admin retreat, and I'm really looking forward to her return in a couple of weeks so that we can begin to think about an action plan for the year ahead.
Good. Thank you. Good. Thanks, Jessica.
Well, I'm glad you're on top of the training, because training is also required. So as you probably would guess. Financial literacy instruction is going to be required. So beginning with the graduating class of 2027, which I think is the kids who are entering ninth grade now.
Yep. Right.
High school graduation requirements must include a half credit of personal financial management and financial literacy. And that as part of that, the Public Act also adds personal financial management, financial literacy to the state's required program of instruction for public schools. The change, the mandate relief, so to speak, is that the capstone project is now optional at the discretion of boards of ed. So there you go. And that concludes the highlights for changes affecting students. Moving on to changes affecting.
Like just doing that, like the idea of the financial literacy program, like I'm all for it, and I think it's a good idea. And I think all of our children should leave our school system financially literate. But to say you have to change the graduation standard now for kids coming in now is just ridiculous. I mean, it doesn't even give anybody any time for planning. We don't have a financial literacy course as a requirement, right? There's an investment class we have, there's economics class we have. Some of our kids take some of these, but the idea that everybody must take what we decide is a financial literacy class, whatever we decide it is. And kids are actually planning for their graduation now, like ninth grade, because you have to map out courses. I mean, you have to develop the course. I mean, it's just, that's beating a dead horse, I guess, but it's just.
That one seems like one that they should have delayed a little further, because first you have to develop the course, get somebody to teach it, and then get the kids to take it all in time for them to graduate in 4 years.
And add more to them or force them to take stuff. But, you know, I'm all for the course, totally all for the course. But
Again, it's that, how much more can you put on the districts?
And how quickly can you?
And how quickly can you implement them?
Incomprehensively, right?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Alan, what's I mean, I hear your pain, but what's the solution?
I think the solution, first of all, I'm going to have to sort of cross map how many students are actually taking courses potentially in business or otherwise that potentially could qualify for the criteria of this.
The only other interesting thing I would say, just from my own business experience, is, I mean, every bank I've been at, we have a financial literacy program that we roll out and go to schools
Yeah.
with. You know, so there may be some play into that from a community standpoint in terms of, you know, we have a pretty
Resources.
robust financial literacy program at the bank
Oh, that's
that we go out and teach at various levels in schools. So it's could be an interesting component.
And a half credit a semester, just to clarify.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, no, I saw Katie's hand. Yes, Katie.
I wanted to ask, sorry, clarification on that too. If this was final and it was the same class that everyone absolutely had to take, or if there were other courses that would then fulfill a requirement.
I think that's what you have to determine.
Yeah, I mean, I would look into that. Just whatever most flexibility that we could offer, I think that's what we would seek to do.
So Jessica, to that question, is there behind this, is there a descriptor as to what that financial literacy is? Is it about credit? Is it about borrowing? Is it about how to balance a checkbook? How?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, good.
You know, that might be forthcoming,
Sure. Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. Good.
but I'm writing down all your questions. I was just talking to my colleagues yesterday and I said, whenever you do one of these updates, write down the questions because that's how we.
Many
Yeah.
schools would have this course, just called financial literacy.
Yeah. No, it's not bad stuff. Good. All right.
So moving on to changes affecting employment. You currently are required to have a minority educator recruitment plan to reduce racial, ethnic, and economic isolation and provide students with opportunities to interact with teachers from other racial, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. So the law changes the name of this plan to the Increasing Educator Diversity Plan. You have to submit this plan to the Commissioner of Education by March 15th of this school year, 2024, for review and approval. Boards that require plan revisions have to submit revised plans. So the commissioner is going to review your plan, may give you feedback. Then you have to submit revised plans no later than May of 2024. And then starting with next school year, you have to implement the approved plan. And so the big question here is, what will that plan look like? I'm not going to look over there at March. What I find interesting about this change is that this change comes at the same time that we have a Supreme Court decision banning race-conscious admissions at the university level as a violation of Title VI and the Equal Protection Clause. So it really begs the question, how are boards of ed supposed to implement this type of plan legally? And that's a question that I will be thinking about
Good.
over the next couple of months.
Thank you.
PD for principals and vice principals. This one struck me as interesting and near and dear to my heart as an employment lawyer. So now there's required PD for principals and vice principals around the management of school personnel and methods for engaging personnel with school goals. So it's not necessarily the case that if you are a principal or vice principal that you have all of the training and skills to manage your people. So you're now required to be trained. Now, what will that training look like and who will deliver it? Who knows? But I'm happy to help.
And again, we're supposed to do this on the 8th day and the 25th hour of each week, right?
I mean, the additional trainings, I do have to say,
Oh.
are an enormous burden. I mean, it's just, I feel so badly for all of you because even just keeping track of the required
But
trainings.
a lot of this also, and correct me if I'm thinking of this wrong, a lot of this plays into contracts and the amount of time and availability that
Oh, for
teachers and
sure.
administrators have in how we structure the contract through the school year. I mean, you're adding time to the school year. You're extending the school year for what we need to accomplish, really. You know, and if we can't do that, then in some ways we have to take away from something else.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
Yeah,
Something's
okay.
got to give.
Okay.
Now there is a required exit survey for teachers leaving the profession and teacher attrition rates. I thought this was an interesting window into what the legislature is thinking about. So now whenever a teacher leaves, you'll have to ask the teacher why they're leaving, whether they're leaving the teaching profession, the teacher's demographics, which is interesting, and the subject areas that the teacher taught. Obviously, you'll probably know the teacher's demographics and what they taught. And then relatedly, boards of ed have to add teacher attrition rates and exit survey results to their strategic profile.
Interesting.
So
I know at this point, because we ask continuously when we have turnover, we turn to Marge and say why. And many times she gets feedback, many times she doesn't get feedback. So is this something then that I guess will educate, or when someone resigns, Marge, you're going to say you have to take an exit survey, right?
Well, this feels like maybe you have to have a written survey. I usually offer to meet with people, but
That's a good point. So is this, you're going to have to develop a written survey?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
Or-
you have to have an exit. So I don't know, the act requires the board to develop an exit survey to be completed by a teacher. Right. And so I don't know whether that has to be in writing or whether you can ask the questions verbally. That's a good question. But yes, you have to now ask the questions, whether in writing. So if a teacher refuses to meet with you, you have to provide the survey. I wouldn't read this though as be requiring that the teacher respond, right? There's no way. that
We
you
just
can
have to
tell
have it.
somebody,
Yeah.
Right, to respond.
Yeah. Okay. Jill.
Are we already tracking this information in our strategic school profiles, or is this information that we haven't been tracking at that level?
I mean, we've been tracking it in HR, but in a, casual way.
Julie, did you have a thought?
I was just going to clarify. It sounded to me like we couldn't compel people to respond to it, but we're obligated to have it.
Will you just get, is it your understanding then we have to have some document that actually is the survey, whether they complete it or not? Or do we even need an acknowledgement that we handed it to them?
These are all good questions
Okay.
that we'll have to just think about as we go through and assist with
Sure.
implementing this. Just off the cuff, I would say you should have a document so that we know what the questions are, how the survey is administered, whether verbally or in writing, we can think about, but I do think you should have some way of confirming that you gave the exiting teacher the opportunity to respond.
Great.
I don't,
Yes, sorry,
I
Dave.
don't
Go
have the
ahead.
statute, but I mean, I don't see electronic and email being precluded by what's here.
Yeah, I'd want to look
Good
more
point.
deeply at the statute and any guidance that comes out, but I don't see why it wouldn't be. I
You
think-
almost cover yourself by emailing the survey to the teacher, whether they respond or not, you've satisfied your requirement.
Yes, I think very few things are not done by email, and that's part of the reason.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
I mean, it might even be a Google form, right? So that you could compile data more quickly and efficiently. Substitute teachers, this is sort of a minor thing, but may be very helpful to the administration. So now a Board of Ed can employ a substitute teacher in the same assignment for up to 60 days without getting a State Department of Ed issued substitute authorization. I think, this is again addressing the concerns around teacher shortages that have come up, particularly since the pandemic. It's been very difficult to fill those substitute roles and to fill holes in your teaching population. Teacher.
Go ahead, Jill. Sorry, Jessica. Go ahead, Jill.
Does this have any impact on us, Marge?
Yes, because we won't have, it used to be 40 days, now it's 60 days. I mean,
Okay.
they're still not certified teachers, so it's not perfect, but
Okay,
it's better.
thank you.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Jessica.
I think that a lot of districts have scrambled because once those 40 days are up, which happens quickly, you've got to figure something else out. You can move the substitute to a different assignment, but that's not always helpful. I also think that it provides greater continuity for the kids. So that should be helpful. Teacher performance evaluation. So the headline here is that the state has now required the State Board of Education to basically completely overhaul the evaluation guidelines. And there are many changes that are now required. For example, the state is going to be removing the requirement that the evaluation guidelines include the 4 performance evaluation designators that we're used to: exemplary, proficient, developing, and below standard, and remove references to teacher evaluation scoring systems to determine ratings. So those changes are forthcoming. The State Board of Ed is also directed to adopt a model teacher evaluation and support program that may be used by boards of ed, but is not required to be used. What you are required to do, though, is to comply with the new teacher evaluation requirements. The law doesn't change your obligation to negotiate with the teachers around what model you're adopting. And then under current law, if you can't agree, then you go to the state model. And if you can't agree on that, then you have to adopt and implement the evaluation program that you've developed, as long as it's consistent with State Board of Education guidelines. So that's a big TBD, right? Because we have to see what the evaluation guidelines are that the State Board of Ed adopts or develops. And this takes effect actually pretty soon, next school year. By next school year, this all has to happen. There are a couple of small revisions to the state's anti-discrimination statutes. This new public act adds age to the list of protected classes, which authorizes the CHRO, the Commission of Human Rights and Opportunities, to investigate claims of discrimination based on age. The act also adds a new definition of sexual orientation to the state's anti-discrimination statutes.
Dave, sorry, Jessica. Dave.
Sorry, thanks.
No,
Mike.
that's right.
Title IX, I was actually, because I see these two next to each other, Title IX and the expansion of the definition.
Yep.
What are the impacts of the expansion of that definition potentially on athletics and participation?
So it's really two separate things, because Title IX is a federal law, and this is a definition that's included in state law. So I would say that with regard to your obligations under Title IX in athletics, I would still look to federal law.
Okay.
But it's a good question. And
I mean, they're side by side. I know it's different regulatory regimes, but
yep.
I just prompted the question by seeing the definition expand.
Yeah, I think where it really may have an impact, if any, is going to be in, so there's federal sexual harassment laws under Title IX, and there's state law sexual harassment rules, and sexual harassment includes harassment or discrimination on the basis of gender identity or expression or sexual orientation. So we may see the change definition coming into play in investigations of sexual harassment and sex discrimination under state law.
But again, discrimination could be a fairly broad scope where it applies.
Discrimination, well, sexual harassment is a subset of sex discrimination.
Right.
And discrimination, I see less about discrimination
Okay.
in this area and more around harassment.
Okay.
And harassment can include things like, students making comments, verbal comments or gestures, or distributing, text messaging, distributing photographs. Harassment can come in many different forms, and harassment is a form of sex discrimination.
Thank you.
Sure.
I don't know if I had a question.
Oh,
Thank you.
yes.
I was caught on the difference between a new definition of sexual orientation versus gender identity and
Yeah.
where that plays in, but I don't know that we need to get into that right now.
Right.
So your answer was very helpful. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Julie.
So I chuckled when I saw this change to required Title IX compliance toolkits, because I'm not sure where the state legislature has been for the last few years, but this has been a huge headache for school district administrators since the Title IX regulations were majorly changed effective in August of 2020. And the headache has simply been that there was a sea change in the requirements that were put on administrators to investigate claims of sexual harassment, how they investigated, and there was really no guidance. So now I think that the state is jumping in because they're realizing that districts need more guidance, they need a toolkit. It's funny that they use that word because we developed a toolkit. And the other reason why I laugh to myself is that the Title IX regulations are about to change again. The proposed regulations came out, I think last year. They were supposed to take effect this summer. That's on delay, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. But the good news is that this toolkit is going to come out and take effect by next school year, October 1st, 2024. So hopefully it will be in sync with the latest changes to Title IX, right? It would really be a shame if we had a toolkit that was out of date. So the thing about Title IX and all of these changes is that we just can't really predict when they'll take effect. So we'll just have to wait and see and be prepared. Also, beginning with the 26-27 school year, you're going to have to submit a Title IX compliance report to the state. So stay tuned for that too. I'm looking at my watch. How am I doing on time? I'm almost
We're a
done.
little behind schedule, but this is good, important stuff, and I think the dialogue is important. So I would say, everyone has this to read. We can always do follow-up questions, but if you want to hit the high level
Sure.
points on the last couple of pages, Jessica, that would be great. Anything you think we need specifically, to understand while you're here.
Sure. So the last section isn't usually in our update that you'll get, but I added it just because there have been some really significant changes in federal law, particularly with the Supreme Court's latest decision. So I alluded to the affirmative action decision before. It's the case that involved Harvard and the University of North Carolina, and the Supreme Court basically said that while previously you could use race as one of many factors in making admission decisions, or national origin, colleges and universities, and probably by implication, really any public institution receiving federal funds cannot do that because it's considered to violate Title VI, which prohibits recipients of federal financial assistance from discriminating based on race or national origin, and also violates the Equal Protection Clause. And then as a guiding principle, the court noted that equal protection's core purpose is to eliminate racial classifications by the government. That's how they justified that decision. Interestingly, though, they did say that their opinion should not be construed as prohibiting universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected their life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise. So I mention it again because, as I said, you're still required to have an increasing educator diversity plan. And so we'll be thinking about how this decision impacts that and other DEI initiatives.
Good.
I'm going to skip over the religious discrimination or religious accommodation case, but it's just sort of an interesting one to think about from an employment perspective. And Marge, I'm sure you and I will be talking about that. One recent development that was of interest, given that book banning is a hot topic now around the country, is that there was a recent case involving Georgia where OCR got involved in the removal by a school district of certain books. So basically, the school district removed certain books that they thought were sexually explicit or pornographic. Some students complained and said that the removal process created a hostile environment for them based on race and their sexual orientation, their gender identity, and their color. And OCR got involved. They filed a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights. OCR got involved, and it's expressed concern that the district took insufficient steps to ameliorate the racially and sexually hostile environment that may have resulted from the book screening process. Ultimately, the school district and OCR entered into a resolution agreement, which is almost like a settlement agreement that required the district to take certain steps to improve that environment. So just an interesting thing to think about as we look at book screening here in Connecticut and around the country.
Dave.
So I had two questions, one relevant to the OCR decision. What's the precedential value of that decision? That only applies to that one case, right?
It does. I think it provides guidance or a window into how OCR might look in a similar circumstance.
Understood. And then going back to the students for fair admissions, I read, in the journal and some other places that a lot of companies are now starting to look at some of their DEI programs and how those programs conform with this ruling. Is that trickled down to school systems yet?
Not yet,
Okay.
because it's so new, but I expect it will.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
And I don't know that we need to spend too much time on the Title IX expected changes to the Title IX process, but suffice it to say that things are going to get a little easier and a little harder. They're going to get easier because you're no longer going to be required to use different people. It was very challenging under the current rules to have different people to fill different roles in the sexual harassment investigation process. You had to have one administrator be the investigator, a separate administrator be the decision maker, a separate administrator be the appeal decision maker. So the Title IX process is going to revert to what it used, more along the lines of what it used to be, where it's just one person can do pretty much all of that, similar to any other type of investigation that a school district does. But it gets a little harder because the definition of sexual harassment has expanded and it covers more, including conduct that occurs off campus that's subject to your disciplinary, jurisdiction.
Great. Questions, thoughts from the board? Jessica, just a big thank you. I know this is a lot of work, and the way you broke it down too in terms of operations, student and curriculum, I think is a really good way to present it, and the employment piece of it, and then just even the federal law. So thank you very much. You always appreciate your time and energy in supporting the district, you and Tom. It's a great partnership we have. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to do this for us. And I know if we have any questions, or we'll continue to work with you on a lot of this stuff, but thank you very much. Is there anything you'd like to wrap it up with?
No, thank you for having me. Thank you for your great questions. I'm going to go back and look more deeply at the legislation, and thanks for your time.
Great.
Thank you,
And
Jessica.